Have Arsenal really been that bad or even substandard this Premier League season? That's what we're going to unpack and explicate in today's video. We're going to talk about the reason why Mikel Arteta is not reverting to type, and that is because he's taking the next steps, or trying to take the next steps in his project. We're going to try and understand the context on the pitch as to why the dynamics and relationships between players maybe aren't quite clicking yet. And this relates maybe to an underwhelming start, if you'd like, in an Arsenal shirt for Kai Havertz. And we're going to finish off with Arsenal posited against Manchester City. They're still the top two, but what has changed from the start of the season to now? We're going to talk about Jurrien Timber's injury and Arsenal really controlling and needing to control the chaos. Welcome back to the Harvey Gratian YouTube channel. I'm so glad you found us. With all this to come, let's get straight on with it. And we're going to start with reverting to type versus the continuation of Arteta's Arsenal project and why the Spaniard has opted for the latter. Why stick with Partey inverting from right back? No Gabriel in the squad. Havertz in the left shadow striker role when the fluency in the final third isn't there. We're not creating at that prolific rate despite the system being so good. Let me explain maybe why. What Arteta is trying to do is create a side that at times is able to bypass the second phase of play and build up straight from the first phase into that final phase of play. And because Arsenal have played Nottingham Forest, Crystal Palace and Fulham, respectively, they're quite passive pressing sides, and this has made that harder. But they're also, in terms of the average quality of the Premier League, poorer sides, and it's why Arteta has chosen to do the experimentation in these first three games. And look, experimentation and trying to create an unpredictable Arsenal side is a theme of pre-season I've covered so in depth. There's so many videos on it, and there's no surprise it's continued into the league campaign. And look, we've still actually on paper, in terms of the underlying numbers, won 3 games. We've still played and outperformed, if you will, all our opponents comfortably. And this is because we still exert very good control on the ball, whether it's a 3-2-5 or a 3-1-6. But before we look at why we look off but still persist with this new system, I want to talk first about individuals, and first Thomas Partey, because of course, technically and creatively, Zinchenko is top-notch when he inverts. But from which side we invert, that isn't actually the problem. It's how the side and the team 11 is comprised. And as I will get onto, Partey is not an optimal solution to invert from right back. But the only reason this has been, at times, a bit of a problem in the first 3 games is because we do not quite have that relentless creativity so far this season that kills an opposition team's confidence. And whilst they are still alive, their outlets are still living and breathing down our throats. But I also now, before we get onto that system, want to talk a little bit very quickly about Gabriel. Why is he not playing? Well, if we invert from the right, of course, that nominal back 3 axis for us is formed. But if we then are forced into a back 4 when we either cannot control the game or defending a transition, because we have inverted from the right-hand side, our outside left centre-back in that back 3 axis in possession is forced into left-back. And ask yourself, can Gabriel be the left-back? The answer for a side going for the title, and in comparison to other players, is no. The left-back, of course, at times must be able to attack, must be able to be at least adept in combining and being progressive on the ball, composed in tighter areas. We look at Kivior and Tomiyasu. They've both inverted in their Arsenal career from left-back into midfield, and Timber is either that dynamic, conservative left centre-back in that back 3 axis, or he can invert from either side, promote in between the lines or overlap as a 6th man in attack. So Gabriel, in terms of the dynamics of the team, when inverted from the right, is simply down the pecking order. But this leads on to why we are not reverting to type. This current system that Arteta is deploying is for big space games, and the teams we have played in these compact blocks have not allowed us to do this. We want to be able to go over presses with Havertz as the target man. These aggressive man-man presses that I have, again, discussed in depth. Have the second ball winner outlets around him. More central density to win the ball instantaneously up the pitch, with often still one wide man free as an outlet on the far side. Often this has been Martinelli. That's sort of the attacking dynamic we've seen quite often, and it's looked strange when we've needed at times that second phase presence that we haven't always got. From a Mikel Arteta point of view, how are we meant to implement these types of systems and attacking dynamics conditioned for these uncontrollably fast Champions League ties, or these uber physical games or technical games versus elite presses that need to be disrupted? That is the setup Arteta is building us for those types of games, where large spaces have to be dominated. And when we haven't practiced these in game situations, which these games against subpar opponents give us a greater chance, not give us a granted chance of doing, but give us a greater chance of implementing while still exerting control on the ball. And look, if it sort of clicked in the first 1 or 2 games, the experimentation might have stopped as well. But the relationships on the pitch, and this becomes a key part of the rest of the video, haven't been fully established everywhere yet. So the experimentation and this system, which has not been developed for these types of games that it's been implemented in and practiced in, has continued. But there may be still some middle ground here, as in the long term, last season's setup is still the way to go against the sides in the first 3 games that we've played this season. And, of course, Mikel Arteta knows this and will revert in due course. Out wide, we would suddenly see much more fluid interchanges, pure rotations between players, and these are the kind of relationships we must be able to build in this new system. Against United, for example, I expect us to revert to type, with Zinchenko inverting from left back, Gabriel coming back into the foray, maybe a Partey starting straight away in that 6 with Rice in the left 8 role. But what's important, it won't be because Mikel Arteta caved and we won't see the system that we've been implementing in the first 3 games before. This is likely what Arsenal and Arteta will always have done, always for this Man United game, be planning to go with the archetypal system that has done so well for us last season. And unfortunately, it would be a luxury to have this, but we don't, of course, have the 11 players in a squad who are able to do both styles, if you will, if you want to call it that. We have some, of course, but we are not settled enough as a team to see that quite yet. For example, let's start to look at Kai Havertz. He's not one of them. He is the shadow striker in our current setup, which doesn't, of course, suit low physical blocks and passive presses. And he's the Ramdeuter from centre forward, or the tip of a diamond, or that advanced left interior when Arteta reverts to type against the first sort of 3 sides, these low blocks that we've seen. That 3-1-6, overloading the last line of play, giving him those pockets and spaces to roam into, space to attack. And I'll get on to Kai Havertz in more detail now, but his relationships with others in this new system, as he's playing this left-hand sided shadow striker role, are not there yet. But let's look now at context, and let's look at Kai Havertz. Whether you think Havertz is a good player or not, whether he will succeed at Arsenal or not, that's not my place to tell you, and you're more than entitled to your opinion. I'm not going to try and change that. But do not think for a second Mikel Arteta has bought someone he won't, or he certainly doesn't believe he has found a use in. He has profiled players to an elite standard so far. And profiles over performances, for example, is a strategy Pep Guardiola has used in scouting players his whole managerial career. To understand Kai Havertz and why he was bought, remove Granit Xhaka from the context completely, because if we are ever, if we're not going to be active in the transfer market in that left centre mid role, Declan Rice will be the Granit Xhaka replacement when we need him in specific games. And Kai Havertz has not actually played a nominal left centre mid or left 8 role once in his Arsenal career yet, not even in pre-season. Havertz has been bought to be utilised as this instant outlet for fast-paced transition-based games or the Raumdeuter against low blocks. But the relationships, like I've said, have not cohered yet. Why is this? Well, the criticisms of the left-hand-sided dynamics that I've aired in my videos covering this season so far have been that a lack of the abundant passer and incisive passer, that there's not really a fundamental positionalist that constantly demands the ball and facilitates rotations around him. When, for example, in low block games, this can often, without this player, look like chaos, and not the good kind. Runners everywhere and sort of surprised when the ball comes to them, and this sort of links directly to Havertz when he has received with his back to goal. Do not judge Havertz based on a second phase player. That's not what he is. It's like judging Thomas Muller to Toni Kroos or Christian Eriksen to Dele Alli. Judge Havertz purely, as I've said, on output basis, and we're going to need to be a bit patient with him. So if you want to criticise him, just get the basis of your criticisms right and understand the player. He's not been bought for that Xhaka role at all, as I have tirelessly said. Xhaka drifted deep. Xhaka filled for Zinchenko at left back. Xhaka was a ball magnet on top of sort of his box crashing. But in terms of the long term, personally, I'm not worried yet. I'm not worried yet, because with the right balance and the relationships, the environment that Arteta has created on the pitch is simply as good as it gets. And I really hope that when partnerships sort of connect and click on the pitch, this team will be such a force. We've seen how Kai has operated with Trossard and with Jesus in pre-season, and not saying it sort of blew me away with how efficient the dynamic was, but we progressed up the pitch so much more efficiently, with Havertz filling that vacated space by Leandro Trossard as he moved from left wing into the double pivot alongside Thomas Partey. However, of course, I granted that we can't have this dialogue the whole time. These relationships must click soon, and in a side I have branded able to go toe-to-toe with City, there must be some marginal game in the short term. So, if Havertz isn't working at the moment, who else could play that advanced left interior or shadow striker role? And why could it be Fabio Vieira, despite being so different in profile to Kai Havertz? Well, first of all, we'll start with Martin Odegaard. He's already shown he can be the 8 that drops deeper at times. That's part of Arsenal's newfound unpredictability. Which interior, if you will, drops deeper. And we flip to Vieira. He can collect the ball, like Kai Havertz, on the drop and then carry it forward. And I think the image of Vieira running onto the ball, that Havertz, Jesus, and Nketiah, whoever, have held up for him in that centre forward, is a frightening image. And he makes things happen on the ball. He's that enigmatic quality where goal-creating actions just seem to come with him. That's something I've said about Fabio since his first days in the Arsenal shirt. That's what we're trying to bring with his signing, that killer in those final spaces in and around the box. And his left-footedness has sort of a perfect proprietary for the dynamic in this shadow striker role that Arteta's trying to create, playing those killer balls behind the last line into the box. And look, ball striking in the shadow striker position is so important. And if you give yourself the platform and time and ability to play at a high speed, like Vieira can, and the players around him will be able to provide for him, someone who can hit through the ball so consistently, so reliably and cleanly as Vieira will get so much output out of that position. And it may be something we see Arteta persist with more after his impressive cameo against Fulham. It also gives Arsenal Vieira in this role, when he does come slightly deeper, that option to create from deep, which is a necessity against these compact shapes. That option to kill sides before they've even beckoned you into their sort of block traps. This quality is sought after, really hard to find, especially now that Xhaka is gone and we sort of lose his half-space crosses. Arsenal lack that natural central presence capable of doing this, and hardly anyone does it bar KDB, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Bruno Fernandes. This is what Arsenal have tried to bring in Fabio Vieira. And lastly, I think Vieira has that spatial awareness to operate in those hectic, advanced areas where a bit of pauser can be the difference. But for the final part of the video, I want to look at Arsenal directly now in comparison to Manchester City. And I'm going to split this part into two segments, if you will, talking about Jurrien Timber and then some more sort of intangible qualities that separate the two sides. I had, of course, both sides neck and neck. And other than points, what, if anything, has changed now between them? I still strongly believe these will be the top two and they'll be separated from the rest of the pack. It will be 93 to 85 points for the pair of them at the end of the season. Arsenal now, of course, so unpredictable. Which 8 drops deeper, which fullback inverts, how we build up. And look, we're arguably more unpredictable than Manchester City, but the experimentation has come at a cost and we now find ourselves 2 points behind sort of Pep's juggernaut. And before I get into maybe what's changed sort of intangibly between the two sides, I want to talk about Jurrien Timber and how his injury changes things. I said this would be a video on its own, but I've decided to put this into sort of a bigger Arsenal general video. So we're going to talk about Timber. Of course, the individual qualities that we lose with his injury is that additional press-resistant player with a 360-degree turning circle, that composed profile who is dynamic when dropping the shoulder, creates false transitions, totally unique in terms of other inverted fullbacks like that. He also exploits space in between the lines in a 3-1-6, if we ever want to line up with that. And technically, no one, of course, can rival Zinchenko on the ball, but it's taken the dependency off the Ukrainian for Arteta. And his versatility as well, of course, was laid bare. Most minutes for Arsenal has come as a traditional left-back or that conservative left centre-back role in a back three in possession. Again, I'll go back to the Gabriel situation. That's why he was picked over Gabriel. It's a better dynamic to have him operating in that role with Partey inverting from right back. And he combines technicality with athleticism, probably more than anyone else in the squad, meaning we don't always have the trade-off between Zinchenko getting substituted for Tomiyasu or Tierney as it was last season every time, whether he's playing on the left or the right. He's that springy, snappy tackler, elite counter-presser, relentless duel winner, and like I said, can invert from either side due to his ability to receive on either foot or turn both ways, play the traditional fullback or outside centre-half, and the only thing he actually lacks from being able to do the central centre-back role, like William Saliba in the back three, is that tower-like presence. So essentially, what he gives us is that additional body across the whole of the back four, and those compound players make squad building so much easier, and without them you may have to recruit multiple focus players to do that role. And when you say we got Timber for only 35 million, again, his injury is a massive blow. Arsenal are lucky that in his absence we can still invert from either side, but the depth is gone. And Partey, of course, is not an optimal solution. You know, although we still can, it's without the same level of certainty that we can control games for a 90-minute period when Zinchenko is subbed off after 70 minutes or when Zinchenko is unavailable now. Another issue that the Timber, when he's available, solves is connections on the pitch. Again, that compound utility as a player has bred relationships with Rice. Against Manchester City, we saw them interchanging as deep and high members of Arsenal's build-up. And look, we can still exert total control in our 3-2-5 and have the profiles in the 3-1-6 to create sort of balance. But his injury is far from ideal. And now we only have 6 players. And this has taken away Thomas Partey as an option because we will need him to start in the 6 at some point with Rice in the 8. And that leaves us with 6 players, again minus Partey, to cover the whole of that those back 4 positions instead of the minimum 2 in each position that Timber gave us. Of course, we're not the only side with moving parts. I don't want to be completely pessimistic about Timber's injury. City were losing another compound player in Gundogan, and this meant they bought Kovacic, who has the manipulative dribbling, the build-up capacity, sort of duel winning as Gundogan, but not the upside of his box crashing, his engine, his ball striking, and that's why they've gone for Nunez as well from Wolves, sort of a 2-in-1 to cover one player. They've also have moving parts in terms of bringing in the raw talent in Jeremy Doku, who gives them a 1v1 threat that they'd lost in Riyad Mahrez and lacked in the squad. Gvardiol obviously came in for Laporte, and it's that ascendancy in the fine margins that Arteta and Pep are both competing for. Both competing with the experimentation we've seen from Arteta and these transfers from Pep. And that's why Bernardo Silva extending his contract was so important. You know, we've talked about compound players and Jurrien Timber, but in Bernardo Silva, we're talking about the ultimate one. We're talking about a left-hand sided number 10, a right winger, an interior, a pivot, a left back, a false 9, all tied into one. So Timber's injury is potentially big, but we're not the only side with moving parts, and hopefully it doesn't come back to bite us, that injury. But now I want to look at intangibles in the second part that I said I would get onto. Why are Arsenal so different away from home compared to at home? I think if it's hard to put your finger on, which I've really struggled to put a finger on, why that is, and I don't really know, I've instead looked at sort of the intangibles. I think it feels like such an occasion every time we play at the Emirates, when we have the Angel playing at the start of a match, North London Forever ringing out around the stadium. Of course, that's fantastic. It just feels like such an occasion, and I think the highs and lows that the fans transmit to the players feeds sort of to the younger group sometimes. And this isn't a bad thing, because keep the atmosphere. The atmosphere has been a massive part of the Arteta revolution, but I think the emotionality is making the Emirates such a big occasion. There can be a distinct, we can distinguish between the two, and that's sort of what differentiates us from the algorithmic football in Guardiola's Manchester City. And again, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but this emotionality has always been part of Arsenal Football Club. But I think the players and fans need to learn how to control sort of the atmosphere and the occasions that we chuck ourselves into that is so brilliant. And like I said, the players have to do that just as much as the fans. But that's my video, and that's my summary on Arsenal's first 3 games, where we sit as a side, and it really hasn't been as substandard as maybe some people are saying it has been. There's an experimentation still continuing. Maybe we actually just need a bit more time to click than I've previously thought. And hopefully we can then grow into the season instead of taper off as we did at the end of last. Of course, Pep's Man City didn't need this experimentation phase. They were already that drilled machine. But this is looking to make Arsenal a better side than before. But I do expect us to click. And that's why we're not reverting to type as quickly as anticipated. And look, I still think we will be a force this season, hopefully in the Champions League as well. That's what we're trying to be programmed for by the Spaniard Mikel Arteta. It will be an Arsenal City title race again, bar some major developments in the transfer window. We've seen United looking at number 6 in Sofian Amrabat. Liverpool, although they have Endo now in that 6, they need another one, and they need a left centre-back as well. Signing Gravenberch is not the profile required. Chelsea signing Cole Palmer, probably their first natural between-the-lines player that they've signed. Newcastle, again, need more controller options, but there's loads of room to still move in this transfer window, and that's why it's going to be a very, very interesting last day or so. But Arsenal and City still away from the pack, in my opinion. Unfortunately, Manchester City have the early lead, and I hope the experimentation for Arsenal will mean we can make a comeback later on. But that's all from me. I really hope you've enjoyed. I only ask you to subscribe, like, share, comment, whatever at the end of the video, because hopefully that means you've found it informative. But that's all from me. I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.